Welcome back, my friend. If today has been long, heavy, or filled with too many thoughts, then this quiet moment is for you. Before our story begins, give yourself permission to stop carrying the day. You do not need to solve everything tonight. You do not need to answer every worry. For now, simply let the world slow down. Draw the curtains, turn off the bright lights, or let them fade into a softer glow. Rest your body into the bed, loosen your shoulders, unclench your hands, and let your breathing become gentle. Here, we explore the quiet side of history and science, told slowly, softly, and peacefully, so your mind can drift while your body begins to rest. If this is your first time here, please subscribe and join us for more calming stories made for sleep. Now, close your eyes if you wish, settle into the stillness, and let tonight's story carry you away. There is a place in the Pacific where the ocean once held a moment that quietly changed the course of a war. But if you were to look at it today, you would see nothing, only water, only sky, only silence, stretching farther than the eye can follow. Tonight, we drift back to June of 1942, not to relive the noise of history, but to move slowly through the silence around it to a small place called Midway and an ocean that, even in the midst of everything, never stopped feeling calm. The vast Pacific, where silence stretches for miles. There is a kind of silence that only exists far out at sea, not the silence of a quiet room or a sleeping city, but something deeper, something wider. A silence that does not feel empty, but endless. It stretches in every direction, carried by slow-moving air and the soft rhythm of water that never truly stops. In the early summer of 1942, the Pacific Ocean held that silence. If you could stand there, somewhere between continents, somewhere between what was known and what was not, you would not see borders or maps or nations. You would only see water, a vast breathing surface, shifting gently beneath a sky that seemed too large to belong to any one place. The horizon would be a thin, distant line, always just out of reach, and above it, the light would come slowly. Morning in the open ocean does not arrive all at once. It unfolds. First, a faint glow along the edge of the world, then a gradual softening of darkness. The stars fade one by one until only the pale sky remains, and then, without urgency, the sun lifts itself into view, as if it has done so 1,000 times before and will do so 1,000 times again. There is no rush here, only time, stretching far below the surface. The ocean moves in ways unseen. Cold currents glide past warmer ones. Layers of water shift and settle, carrying with them things that drift, things that sink, and things that rise again. Creatures move through the dark in slow, quiet patterns, unaware of the world above. Up here, on the surface, the wind speaks in soft tones. It brushes across the water, creating small waves, never still, never chaotic, Just enough motion to remind you that nothing here is fixed. The ocean is always changing, but never in a way that demands your attention. It simply continues. If a ship were passing through this space, you might not hear it at first. The ocean would swallow the sound, spreading it thin across miles of open water. Only gradually would it become noticeable. A distant hum, a low vibration carried through the air and the sea alike. And even then, the ship would seem small, because out here, everything feels small. The largest vessels ever built, reduced to quiet silhouettes against an endless blue. Their steel hulls cutting through water that does not resist, only parts and then closes again, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. In June of that year, there were ships out here. They moved slowly, deliberately, across distances so vast that it was easy to forget how far they had come, or how far they still had to go. Days passed without sight of land, without change, without interruption. Men on board these ships learned to live inside that stillness. They woke to the same horizon, ate meals under the same sky, walked decks that gently rose and fell beneath their feet. The rhythm of the ocean became their rhythm, breathing, sleeping, thinking, all aligned with the slow, steady motion of the sea. Some would stand at the edge of the ship and look outward, letting their thoughts drift as far as the horizon allowed. There was something calming about it, something that made the world feel both larger and simpler at the same time. Because out here, there were no distractions, only distance, only time, and the quiet awareness that somewhere beyond that horizon, unseen and unknown, something else was moving too, not close enough to be seen, not loud enough to be heard, but present, always present. The Pacific, vast as it was, did not separate these movements. It held them, carried them, allowed them to exist within the same endless space, without ever forcing them to meet. Not yet. Clouds drifted overhead in slow formations, casting soft shadows that traveled across the water like passing thoughts. Sometimes the sky remained clear for hours, even days. Other times, thin layers of gray would stretch across the horizon, blending sea and sky into one continuous shade. There were moments when it was difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. And in those moments, the world felt even quieter, as if everything had been softened, as if the edges had been blurred. Time itself seemed to slow here, not in a dramatic way, but in something more subtle. Minutes did not feel urgent. Hours did not feel heavy. They simply passed, one into the next, like waves folding into each other without resistance. Out here, nothing demanded your attention. Nothing pulled you forward. You were simply carried. And yet, beneath that calm surface, there was direction. Ships did not drift aimlessly. They followed paths, carefully chosen, quietly maintained, coordinates marked on maps, bearings adjusted with precision, movements planned long before they began. But none of that was visible from the outside. From a distance, it all looked the same. Just ocean, just sky, just silence. The kind of silence that hides things, not in a way that feels threatening, but in a way that feels patient, as if the ocean itself is waiting, waiting for something to arrive, waiting for something to unfold. But in this moment, this early, gentle moment of June 1942. Nothing has happened yet. There is no fire in the sky, no urgency in the air, only ships moving quietly across water that does not remember where they have been. Only men standing beneath a wide and open sky, unaware of how close they are to a moment that will one day be remembered. And the ocean, vast and unchanging, continues to breathe beneath them, slowly, endlessly, as it always has. Midway, a small piece of land in an endless sea. If you keep moving across that wide, open Pacific, if you follow the slow paths that ships once traced across the water, eventually something appears, not suddenly, not dramatically, just a faint interruption in the horizon. At first, it could be mistaken for a cloud or a trick of light, a thin line, barely visible, where the endless blue seems to hesitate. But as you draw closer, gradually, quietly, that line begins to take shape, a strip of land, low, flat, almost fragile against the immensity that surrounds it. This is Midway, Midway Atoll. It does not rise like a mountain, nor does it stretch like a continent. It is not the kind of place that commands attention. In fact, if you were not looking for it, you might pass by without ever knowing it was there. A small atoll, resting gently in the middle of a vast ocean. Two narrow islands, shaped by time and tide, enclosing a quiet lagoon. From above, it would look almost delicate, a thin ring of sand and coral, holding back a shallow, calm center. The water inside the lagoon shifts in lighter shades, soft blues and pale greens, contrasting with the deeper, darker tones of the open sea beyond. There is a stillness here that feels different from the open ocean. The waves that travel for miles across the Pacific, slow as they approach the reef. They break gently, losing their strength before reaching the inner waters. Inside the lagoon, the surface becomes smoother, quieter, as if the ocean itself is resting. Seabirds circle overhead. They come and go without urgency, carried by the wind, their movements part of a rhythm older than any map or boundary drawn by human hands. Some land along the narrow beaches, others rest on scattered structures that now stand upon the sand, small reminders that this quiet place has not gone entirely unnoticed, because despite its size, Midway matters, not in the way large cities matter, not through crowds or noise or constant motion, but in a quieter way, a way that depends entirely on where it is. Because here, in the middle of so much emptiness, location becomes everything. Midway sits between distant shores, between continents that cannot see each other, separated by thousands of miles of water. It is a point along invisible lines, routes that cross the Pacific, paths that ships and aircraft must follow if they wish to move from one side of the ocean to the other. And so, even a place this small can become important, not because of what it is, but because of where it rests. In 1942, there were signs of that importance. Runways stretched across the flat land, long, straight lines carved into the sand, built not for beauty, but for purpose. Aircraft moved in and out, their presence breaking the natural quiet in brief, passing moments. Structures stood near the edges of the lagoon, simple, functional, weathered by salt air and constant wind. Nothing here was elaborate. Nothing here was meant to last forever. But everything here had a role to play. Men lived on this island too. They moved through their days in a rhythm shaped by both the land and the sea. The air carried the scent of salt and sun-warmed sand. The wind never truly stopped. It shifted direction, softened or strengthened, but it was always there, an invisible companion in every moment. Life on Midway was not crowded. There were no long streets filled with noise, no distant hum of a city, only open sky, low buildings, and the constant presence of the ocean surrounding everything. At night, the darkness would settle gently without the glow of large cities. The sky would fill with stars, thousands of them scattered across the vast black above, reflected faintly in the quiet waters of the lagoon. The horizon would disappear completely, blending sea and sky into a single, endless space. And in that stillness, it would be easy to forget how small this place truly is. Easy to believe, even for a moment, that this island could stand alone, untouched by the wider world. But that would not be true, because far beyond the horizon, far beyond what could be seen from its quiet shores, movements were already underway. Ships, like the ones drifting through the open Pacific, were following their paths. Aircraft, too, traced invisible lines across the sky. Messages passed through the air, unheard but constant, carrying information from one place to another. All of it slowly converging. And Midway, small and quiet as it was, lay directly in the path of that convergence. But here, on the island itself, the days still moved gently. The sun rose, the wind shifted, the tide came and went. The lagoon remained calm. Seabirds continued their quiet circles overhead, and the land, thin, fragile, surrounded on all sides, rested in the middle of an ocean that gave no sign of what was coming. Because the Pacific does not rush, it does not warn, it simply holds everything within it until the moment arrives. And for now, Midway remains just what it has always been, a small piece of land floating quietly in an endless sea. After Pearl Harbor, the ocean feels different. There are moments in history that do not feel loud when they happen, but afterward, everything becomes quieter in a different way. The Pacific, in the months after attack on Pearl Harbor, was still the same ocean. The water still moved with the same slow rhythm. The wind still crossed its surface in long, patient currents. The horizon still stretched as far as the eye could see. And yet, something had changed. Not in the waves, not in the sky, but in the way people looked at it. Before, the ocean had felt like distance, a wide space separating places, carrying ships from one shore to another, a path, a passage, something to cross. Now, it felt different. It felt like something that could hold events, something that could hide them, something that could carry consequences across thousands of miles without ever revealing how or when they would arrive. Far away from Midway, near the islands of Hawaii, there had been a morning not so different from any other. The light had come slowly. The air had been calm. The water had reflected the sky in that same quiet, familiar way. And then something had passed through that calm. Not something the ocean had created, but something that moved across it, quickly, deliberately, leaving behind a moment that would not easily fade. After that day, the Pacific did not become louder. It became more watchful. Ships that moved across its surface no longer traveled with the same ease. Their paths were more careful now, their movements more deliberate. Routes that once felt routine were now followed with quiet attention, as if the space between destinations had grown more uncertain. The ocean had not changed, but the meaning of crossing it had. Messages moved differently too. Where there had once been open communication, now there was silence or something close to it. Signals became shorter, more guarded, words chosen with care or not spoken at all. The air itself seemed to carry things unseen, invisible threads of information moving from one place to another, sometimes understood, sometimes not. And beneath it all, the ocean continued its slow, steady motion, indifferent, unchanged. From the deck of a ship, looking out across that endless surface, it would still appear peaceful. The same soft waves, the same gentle rise and fall, the same distant horizon that revealed nothing of what lay beyond it. But those who stood there now saw it differently, because they knew that somewhere beyond what they could see, other ships were moving too. Other paths were being followed. Other plans were unfolding in silence. And the ocean, vast as it was, did not separate these things. It connected them. It allowed them to exist within the same space, unseen, but not unlinked. A ship could sail for days, even weeks, without encountering another vessel. The distance was that great, the emptiness that complete, and yet, at the same time, those ships could be moving toward each other, guided by decisions made far away, by messages carried through the air, by intentions that had not yet revealed themselves. There is something quiet about that kind of movement, not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of distance, where everything takes time to arrive. On Midway, the days continued much as before. The sun rose over the lagoon. The wind moved across the narrow strips of land. Aircraft came and went in measured patterns. Men went about their routines, watching the sky, listening to signals, maintaining a rhythm that felt steady, even if it rested on something uncertain. There was no visible change in the shape of the island, no sudden shift in the tide, no sign written across the water to say that anything had happened elsewhere. And yet, in the background, there was awareness, a quiet understanding that the Pacific was no longer just distance. It had become something else, something that carried memory, because oceans, in their own way, remember, not through marks or scars that can be seen, but through the way they are used, the way they are crossed, the way people move across them after something has changed. Routes shift, patterns adjust, silence deepens, and even in moments of calm, moments where the sky is clear, the water is smooth, and nothing appears out of place, there is a subtle sense that the stillness is not complete, that it is waiting for the next movement, waiting for the next crossing of paths that have not yet met. In early June of 1942, that waiting continued. The Pacific stretched wide and open, holding within it countless miles of quiet water, and somewhere within that expanse, unseen by most, a series of movements slowly drawing closer together. No urgency in the waves, no warning in the wind, only distance gradually closing. And those who stood on ships or on the quiet shores of Midway could not yet see what was coming. They could only feel, in the stillness around them, that the ocean was no longer just a place to travel across. It had become a place where something was about to happen, quietly, inevitably, like a tide that has already begun to turn. Two forces moving quietly toward the same horizon. Out on the Pacific, distance can be deceiving. Two ships can exist on the same ocean, under the same sky, and yet remain completely unaware of each other. Not because they are hidden, but because the space between them is simply too vast. In early June of 1942, this was exactly the case. Across thousands of miles of open water, movements had already begun. Not rushed, not chaotic, but steady, deliberate, quiet. On one side of the ocean, a fleet moved forward. Its ships traveled in formation, their paths carefully planned long before they ever left port. Each vessel held its place in a larger design, something structured, intentional, shaped by decisions made far away. From above, they might have appeared as small, dark shapes against the deep blue. From the deck, the view was simpler. Only water ahead and sky above. The rhythm of movement remained calm. Engines hummed beneath layers of steel. Waves parted gently along the hulls. The wind passed across open decks, carrying the same salt-scented air that had always belonged to the sea. There was no sense of urgency in the motion itself, only direction. Somewhere else, far beyond sight, another fleet was moving too, not toward what it could see, but toward what it believed. Because in a place as vast as the Pacific, movement is often guided not by vision, but by understanding, by information gathered, interpreted, and trusted. Even when the horizon remains empty, these ships followed their own quiet paths. Their course lines stretched across maps marked with coordinates and estimates, adjusted over time, refined through signals received and decisions made in rooms far removed from the ocean itself. But out here, none of that could be seen. Only movement, only the slow crossing of distance. Days passed in this way. The ocean did not change to reflect what was happening upon it. It did not grow darker, or louder, or more restless. It remained as it always had, vast, steady, and indifferent to the intentions carried across its surface. Clouds drifted overhead in long, soft formations. Light shifted gradually from morning to afternoon, from afternoon to evening. The horizon remained constant, always distant, always just beyond reach. And between these two unseen forces, the space slowly narrowed, not in a way that could be felt, not in a way that could be measured by those simply standing on deck, watching the water pass beneath them. But it was happening quietly, inevitably, on board the ships. Life continued in its steady rhythm. Men moved through their routines with practiced familiarity. Tasks were completed not in haste, but in sequence, one action following another, as it had so many times before. Equipment was checked, signals were received and sent, watches were kept. There was a calm to it all, a sense of order within the vastness of the sea. Some stood at the edges of the decks, looking outward, letting their thoughts drift into the open horizon. Others remained within the interior spaces, where the sounds of the ocean became distant, replaced by the steady presence of machinery and quiet conversation. No one could see the full picture, not from here, because the Pacific does not reveal its patterns easily. It allows things to exist separately, even when they are connected. It allows distance to feel permanent, even when it is slowly closing. And so, these two forces continued forward, each moving with purpose, each guided by information that was incomplete, but believed to be enough, each unaware of how close they already were to a moment that would bring those separate paths together. There is something almost gentle about that kind of convergence, not the meeting itself, but the approach, the slow drawing near of two lines that have traveled far without ever touching, now beginning, almost imperceptibly, to align. The ocean, wide as it is, can hold that process without disturbance. It does not rush the moment. It does not announce it. It simply allows it to happen. On Midway, the island remained still. The lagoon reflected the sky in soft, shifting colors. The wind moved across the narrow strips of land. Aircraft rested between their movements. Men went about their days, aware in some quiet way that things beyond the horizon were no longer distant in the way they once had been. But still, nothing could be seen, only the same open water, only the same calm sky. And yet, beyond that horizon, just out of reach, two paths were beginning to meet, not suddenly, not violently, but in the same slow, steady way that everything moves across the Pacific, like currents beneath the surface, like tides that turn without sound, like time itself, carrying everything forward, whether it is noticed or not. And as the days moved closer to June 4, 1942, the distance between those unseen forces continued to fade until, at last, the quiet would begin to change. But not yet. For now, there is still only ocean, still only silence, still only the long, gentle movement of ships beneath a sky that gives nothing away. The unseen war, messages traveling through air. Not all movement across the ocean can be seen. Some of it travels quietly, without ships, without waves, without leaving any trace behind. It moves through the air. In the months leading up to the Battle of Midway, there was another kind of crossing taking place, one that did not depend on distance in the same way ships did. Messages, short, fragmented, often incomplete. They moved invisibly across the Pacific, carried by radio waves that passed over water, over islands, over empty stretches of sky where nothing seemed to exist at all. If you stood on the deck of a ship, you would not see them. The horizon would remain clear. The ocean would remain calm. Nothing in the wind would suggest that anything was passing through it. And yet, all around, there was motion. Inside certain rooms, quiet, enclosed, softly lit, this movement became visible in another way. A flicker of sound, a pattern of signals, dots and dashes, tones and pauses, rhythms that repeated and shifted, forming something that only a trained ear could begin to understand. Operators sat with headphones pressed gently against their ears. They listened not for words in the way people usually listen, but for patterns, for changes in tempo, for something slightly different from what had come before. Each signal carried meaning, but that meaning was not always clear. Not at first. Sometimes it arrived broken, sometimes incomplete, sometimes hidden behind layers of encoding that transformed simple messages into something else entirely. And so, the listening became patient, careful, almost meditative, because understanding did not come from a single message. It came from many, collected over time, compared, studied, slowly assembled into something larger. Out on the open ocean, ships moved through silence. But in these rooms, there was a different kind of quiet, a quiet filled with faint sounds, steady, repetitive, almost soothing if you did not try to interpret them. The soft tapping of equipment, the low hum of machines, the occasional shift of paper, the turning of a page, nothing sudden, nothing loud, just a continuous flow of signals, arriving from places that could not be seen. There is something gentle about the idea that even in the vast emptiness of the Pacific, nothing is ever truly still, that across thousands of miles, information can travel without disturbing the surface of the sea. No waves change, no clouds shift, no sign appears to mark its passage, and yet it arrives. In 1942, this invisible movement had become as important as anything that crossed the water itself, because while ships carried people and aircraft carried machines, these signals carried something else entirely: intent, plans, possibilities. They did not always reveal everything. In fact, most of the time, they revealed very little. A fragment here, a code name there, numbers, references, brief transmissions that seemed almost meaningless when taken alone. But together, they began to form patterns, and patterns, over time, become understanding. Those who worked within this unseen space learned to trust that process. They did not rush it. They could not, because to move too quickly, to assume too much from too little, would be to lose the clarity that only patience could bring. So they listened, hour after hour, day after day. The outside world continued as it always had. The ocean stretched wide and calm. Ships moved along their quiet paths. Midway remained a small, still point in a vast and open sea. But within these listening rooms, something else was happening. Something slower than movement, but just as important. Information was gathering, not in one place, but across many, not all at once, but piece by piece. Each signal added a small detail. Each pattern suggested a possibility. Each repetition hinted at something that might be taking shape beyond the horizon. And yet, nothing was certain. Not yet, because signals, like the ocean itself, can be difficult to read. They shift, they change, they conceal as much as they reveal. A message might be heard, but not understood, or understood, but only partially, or understood completely, but too late to matter. So the work continued in quiet persistence. No urgency in the movements, no dramatic realization, only the slow, careful assembling of something that could not yet be seen in full. And beyond those rooms, beyond the reach of those signals, the Pacific continued to hold its silence. Two forces still moved across its surface. Midway still rested at its center. The horizon still revealed nothing. But between all of these, invisible threads were forming, connecting distances, carrying fragments of intention from one place to another. And somewhere within that unseen network, the first outlines of what was to come had already begun to take shape, softly, quietly, like a message carried on the wind, heard only by those who were listening. Listening and learning to understand. Listening, at first, is simple. You hear something and you recognize it. But this kind of listening, the kind that unfolded quietly in rooms connected to the Pacific, was something else entirely. Because what arrived through those headphones was not meant to be understood. Not easily, not directly. The messages that moved across the air in 1942 were carefully shaped to hide their meaning. Words were replaced, patterns were altered, familiar language was transformed into something that no longer resembled itself. And yet, it was still language, still something created with intention, still something that, if approached with patience, could be gently unfolded in places like Station HYPO. This unfolding became a daily rhythm, not rushed, not forced, but steady and continuous. Rooms were filled with paper, notes, fragments, partial transcriptions of signals that had been heard but not yet fully understood. Tables held maps marked with lines and symbols, each one representing a possibility rather than a certainty. Nothing here was complete. Everything was in progress, and the people working in these spaces learned to live inside that uncertainty. They did not expect answers to arrive fully formed. Instead, they worked with pieces, a repeated phrase that appeared across different messages, a number that returned again and again, a pattern in timing. Signals sent at certain hours, then repeated in slightly altered forms. Each detail, on its own, seemed small, almost insignificant. But over time, these details began to connect, not in obvious ways, not all at once, but gradually, like points of light forming a shape in the night sky. There is a quiet discipline in that kind of work. It requires attention without tension, focus without urgency, the ability to sit with something incomplete and not rush to fill the gaps too quickly, because the danger was always there. The temptation to assume, to take a fragment and turn it into a conclusion. But assumptions in this kind of space could mislead as easily as they could guide. So instead, the process remained careful, measured, almost gentle. Pencils moved across paper, marking possibilities. Notes were compared, then set aside, then returned to again. Hours or days later, conversations were quiet, often unfinished, as if each thought was being held lightly, ready to change if new information arrived. And it always did. Signals continued to come in, one after another, carried across the same vast ocean that seemed so still from above. They arrived without announcement, without explanation, just fragments, always fragments. But with each new piece, the picture shifted, slightly, a little more defined, a little less uncertain. Those working in these rooms began to sense that something was forming, not clearly, not completely, but enough to feel its presence. There were references that appeared more often now, indications of movement, suggestions of coordination, signals that did not stand alone, but seemed to relate to one another in subtle ways. It was not yet a plan, but it was no longer random, and so the listening deepened. What had once been passive became more focused, not in a hurried way, but in a more attentive one. Each signal was no longer just another fragment. It was part of something larger, something that required care to understand. Outside, the world remained unchanged. The Pacific stretched wide and open. Ships continued their quiet crossings. Midway remained still, its lagoon reflecting the slow passage of clouds. Nothing on the surface suggested that anything was being uncovered, and in a sense, nothing had been uncovered yet. Not fully, because understanding, like the ocean, has its own pace. It does not arrive all at once. It gathers, it builds, it reveals itself slowly, in layers. And in those dimly lit rooms, filled with paper and quiet concentration, that process continued, unseen, unhurried, but moving forward all the same. Somewhere within the fragments, there was meaning. Somewhere within the patterns, there was intention. And though it could not yet be spoken with certainty, there was a growing sense that these scattered pieces were not leading nowhere. They were pointing gently, carefully, towards something that had not yet come into view, something still hidden beyond the horizon, but not for long. A name repeated, AF. At first, it was just a small detail, something that appeared, then disappeared, then returned again. Not loudly, not urgently, just quietly, within the flow of messages that continued to move across the Pacific. A designation, 2 letters, AF. It did not stand out on its own. In coded communication, there were always symbols like this, short references meant to replace something longer, something more specific. Names became letters, locations became numbers. Meaning was folded into smaller shapes, easier to send, harder to recognize. So when AF appeared, it did not immediately reveal anything. It was simply noted, written down alongside other fragments, compared with earlier messages, placed into a growing collection of patterns that was still, at that point, incomplete. But then, it appeared again and again, always in similar contexts, always surrounded by signals that suggested movement, coordination, preparation. Something about it felt consistent, and consistency, in a world of fragments, begins to matter. Those working within Station HYPO did not rush to define it. They had learned not to, because a repeated signal does not always mean a clear answer. It can suggest importance, but not identity. It can hint at meaning, but not confirm it. So instead, they observed. They placed each occurrence of AF beside the others. They looked at the messages around it, the timing, the structure, the subtle shifts in phrasing that might reveal something more. And slowly, a question began to take shape, not spoken loudly, not declared with certainty, but present. What is AF? It was not a question that could be answered in a single moment. There was no message that would arrive and simply explain it. No clear translation waiting to be uncovered. Only pieces arranged carefully, patiently, in the hope that they would begin to align. Some possibilities were considered, some dismissed, others left open, not because they were convincing, but because there was not yet enough reason to close them off. That is the nature of this kind of understanding. It grows through attention, not assumption. And so, the work continued in that same quiet rhythm. Signals arrived, notes were taken, patterns were compared, and AF remained, not fading, not changing, simply present, like a marker that pointed towards something just beyond reach. Outside, the ocean held its silence. Midway remained what it had always been, a small, quiet atoll, surrounded by miles of open water. Its lagoon still reflected the sky. Its shores still felt distant from everything else. Nothing on the island itself suggested that it might be connected to this quiet question forming in distant rooms. Nothing in the wind, or the tide, or the movement of seabirds hinted at any hidden meaning. And yet, the possibility was there, not obvious, not confirmed, but slowly becoming harder to ignore. Because in the world of signals, repetition carries weight, and when something returns often enough in the same patterns, in the same quiet way, it begins to ask for attention, not loudly, but persistently. AF, 2 letters, simple, unremarkable, and yet, within the slow, careful process of listening and understanding, they began to feel significant, not because they were understood, but because they were not. And in that uncertainty, something began to shift, a subtle movement, not across the ocean, but within the minds of those who were trying to read it. A sense that this small detail, this repeated fragment, might not be just another piece in a scattered puzzle, but something closer to the center, something that, once understood, could quietly bring the rest of the picture into focus. Still, nothing was certain. The ocean remained wide, the horizon remained empty, and AF remained a question, a quiet one, waiting to be answered. A quiet test and a gentle answer. There are moments when understanding does not come from waiting, but from asking a question in a very careful way. By this point, the pattern had settled into something difficult to ignore. AF was no longer just a passing fragment. It had appeared too often, too consistently, always near signals that suggested movement, direction, preparation, and yet it remained undefined, a name without a place, a reference without a clear meaning. Those working within Station HYPO had reached a quiet edge in their process. They had listened, they had compared, they had waited. Now, they needed something more, not a guess, not an assumption, but a way to let the answer reveal itself. And so, an idea began to form, simple, careful, almost gentle in its design. If AF was a place, then perhaps it could be made to speak, not directly, but indirectly, by creating a small signal, something ordinary, something believable, and allowing it to move outward into the same invisible space where all other messages were traveling. From the quiet island of Midway Atoll, a message was prepared, not hidden, not encoded, just a simple transmission, sent openly, as if it were nothing more than routine communication. It spoke of a problem, water, a shortage, something small, something practical, the kind of message that would not stand out on its own, drifting across the air like so many others. And then they waited, not with urgency, not with expectation, but with the same patience that had guided everything so far. Because if the pattern was real, if the connection they suspected truly existed, then somewhere beyond the horizon, that message would be heard. And somewhere within the flow of coded signals, it might be reflected back. Time passed. Signals continued. The quiet rhythm of listening did not change. But then, within that steady flow, something appeared. A coded message, short, unremarkable at first glance, but within it, a familiar reference, AF, and alongside it, something new, a detail, a mention of water, a problem, a condition that mirrored the message that had been sent from Midway, now transformed, encoded, carried back through the invisible network of communication. It was not loud, not dramatic, no sudden realization filled the room. Just a moment, a quiet alignment of two pieces that had been moving separately, now gently connecting. AF was Midway. The answer had not been forced. It had not been assumed. It had emerged naturally from the pattern itself. And in that moment, something shifted, not in the ocean, not in the sky, but in the understanding of those who had been listening. Because now, the fragments had a center. The scattered pieces of information, movements, signals, timing, could begin to settle around something real, something known, a place, a small atoll in the middle of the Pacific, quiet, unassuming, and now, clearly, part of something larger. The realization did not change the world outside. The lagoon at Midway remained calm. The wind still moved across the sand. The ocean still stretched in every direction, holding its silence. But within that silence, a new clarity had formed. The unseen threads that had been drifting through the air were no longer as loose as they once were. They had begun to tighten, to draw together, forming a shape that could now be followed, a direction, a possibility, and with that, a plan could begin. Not rushed, not hurried, but careful, deliberate, shaped by the same patience that had uncovered this quiet truth. Because understanding, once it arrives, does not need to shout. It simply settles, and from that stillness, action can begin. Far beyond Midway, fleets continued their slow movement across the Pacific, unaware that something about their path had just been gently revealed, unaware that the quiet island they were moving toward was no longer just a point on a map, but a place now understood, anticipated, and quietly prepared for. And the ocean, vast and unchanged, continued to hold them all within its endless space. But now, the silence carried something new, not uncertainty, but knowledge, soft, precise, and waiting for what would come next. Ships crossing distance, one horizon at a time. Distance, out on the Pacific, is not something you feel all at once. It does not arrive as a number or a measurement on a map. It reveals itself slowly, Through time, a ship begins its journey, and at first, everything feels close. The memory of land is still present. The idea of destination still feels near, but as the days pass and the horizon remains unchanged, distance begins to stretch quietly, almost without notice. In June of 1942, ships were moving across that distance, not rushing, not racing, but following paths that had been carefully set long before they ever touched the open ocean. On board these vessels, there was a rhythm that rarely changed. Morning came with the same soft light spreading across the water. The decks, still cool from the night air, slowly warmed beneath the rising sun. Crew members moved through familiar routines, checking equipment, walking their assigned paths, pausing briefly to look outward, as if the horizon might offer something different today. But it never did. Only water, only sky, and the steady motion forward. Engines worked beneath the surface, unseen but constant. A low, continuous hum, so steady that after a while it faded into the background. It became part of the ship itself, like a heartbeat that no longer needed to be noticed. The ocean parted at the bow, not dramatically, just enough to allow passage. Water folded gently away, then closed again behind the ship, leaving no lasting mark, no trail that could be followed, no sign that anything had moved through this space at all. And so, each ship seemed alone, even when it was not, because beyond the visible horizon, other ships were moving too, other paths, crossing the same ocean, guided by different intentions, different understandings, but carried forward in the same quiet way. They did not see each other. They could not. The curvature of the earth, the vastness of the sea, it all worked together to keep distance intact, to allow separation, even when convergence had already begun. There is something almost peaceful about that separation. Each vessel exists within its own small world, its own routines, its own sense of time. Meals are taken at regular hours. Conversations drift between moments of silence. Footsteps echo softly across metal decks. The wind moves through open spaces, carrying the same scent of salt and distance. And always, the horizon remains a thin line that never seems to grow closer. On some days, the sky remains clear, wide and open, stretching without interruption from one edge of the world to the other. On others, clouds gather in soft layers, casting shadows that move slowly across the water, like thoughts passing through a quiet mind. Rain may come briefly, then pass, leaving the surface of the ocean smoother than before. Time in this space does not push forward. It drifts. Hours blend together. Days fold into one another. The distinction between morning and afternoon becomes less important than the steady continuation of movement. And within that drifting time, distance continues to close. Not suddenly, not noticeably, but steadily. Each mile crossed brings two separate paths a little closer together, even if those on board cannot feel it, even if nothing in their surroundings suggests that anything is changing, because the ocean does not reveal direction. It does not show where you are in relation to others. It simply holds you as you move. On some ships, there may have been a sense, faint, unspoken, that something ahead was different, not visible, not confirmed, just a subtle awareness that this journey was not like others, that it was leading somewhere specific, somewhere important. But even that feeling would have been quiet, easily set aside, because without something to see, without something to point to, the mind returns to the present moment, to the sound of the wind, to the motion of the sea, to the simple act of moving forward, one horizon at a time. And so, the ships continued across a Pacific that gave no sign of what lay ahead, across distances that seemed endless but were slowly, quietly shrinking. Two forces, still unseen to one another, still separated by miles of open water, but no longer as distant as they once had been. The convergence had already begun, softly, silently, carried forward, not by urgency, but by time itself. Life on board, quiet routines carried by the sea. Life at sea is not made of big moments, not most of the time. It is made of repetition, of small actions, carried out again and again, until they begin to feel like part of the ocean itself. On board the ships moving across the Pacific in June of 1942, this rhythm held everything together. The day did not begin with urgency. It began with light, a slow, quiet light that spread across the horizon and settled gently onto the decks. The air carried a coolness left behind by the night, mixed with the familiar scent of salt and metal. Footsteps began to sound softly, measured, unhurried. As the ship gradually came to life again, there was always something to do, not in a demanding way, but in a steady one. Surfaces were cleaned, equipment was checked, small adjustments were made, things that might not seem important on their own, but together formed a pattern of care, a way of maintaining order in a place where everything moved. Even rest had its place within that pattern. Some men stood quietly at the edges of the deck, looking out across the water, not searching for anything in particular, just watching, letting their thoughts drift as far as the horizon allowed. Others remained inside, in narrow spaces where the sound of the ocean softened into a distant presence. Here, conversations were low, often brief, sometimes unfinished. Words came and went without urgency, as if there would always be more time to continue them later. And in many ways, there was, because time at sea feels different. It stretches, it slows, it folds into itself. Hours pass, not because something happens, but because movement continues. Meals arrive at regular intervals, simple, familiar, repeated, the kind of routine that does not require thought, only participation. Sitting together, eating quietly, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. The rhythm of forks and cups, of small gestures that fill the space without disturbing it. Afterward, the day continues. Tasks return. Steps repeat. The ship moves forward, always forward. There is a kind of comfort in that repetition, a sense that even in the middle of a vast and uncertain ocean, something remains steady, something can be relied upon. Not the destination, not the horizon, but the simple structure of the day itself. And within that structure, people begin to settle, not completely, but enough to feel the movement of the ship as something natural, enough to let the sounds of the ocean blend into the background, enough to allow the mind to rest even if only for a moment in the quiet spaces between tasks. Sometimes letters are written, words placed carefully onto paper, carried not across the ocean immediately, but eventually. Messages meant for places far away, places that feel almost unreal in comparison to the endless water surrounding everything here. The act of writing becomes a kind of connection, a way to hold on to something beyond the horizon, even if that connection is delayed, even if it exists only in the hope that the words will one day arrive. As the day moves toward evening, the light begins to soften again. The sharp brightness of midday fades into warmer tones. Shadows grow longer across the deck. The wind changes slightly, cooler now, carrying the quiet promise of night. The ocean reflects these changes without resistance. Its surface shifts in color, in texture, in tone, but never in a way that feels abrupt. Everything here transitions slowly, gently. Night comes in the same way, not suddenly, but as a gradual dimming of the world. Lights appear on the ship, small, controlled, contained. The sky above fills once more with stars, clearer here than in almost any other place. Thousands of distant points of light, steady and silent, stretching across the dark, and beneath them, the ship continues, its path unchanged, its movement constant. Inside, some sleep, others remain awake, keeping watch, maintaining the quiet continuity of the journey. There is always someone present, always someone listening, observing, ensuring that the rhythm does not break. And through it all, the ocean carries them, not pushing, not pulling, simply allowing them to move. There is no visible sign in these moments that anything is approaching. No change in the sky, no signal in the water, only the same steady pattern of life unfolding as it has for days and will continue to unfold for days more. And yet, beneath that calm repetition, distance continues to close. Two paths, still unseen to one another, still separated by miles of open water, moving quietly forward within the same vast space. But on board these ships, life remains what it is in this moment. Simple, repetitive, calm, carried gently by the slow rhythm of the sea. Pilots preparing without knowing what's ahead. There is a different kind of stillness just before flight, not the stillness of the ocean, wide and endless, not the stillness of night, quiet and complete, but something in between. A pause on the decks of the carriers moving across the Pacific. Aircraft rested in long, careful lines, wings folded or extended, surfaces catching the soft light of early morning or the fading glow of evening. They did not move on their own. They waited, and beside them, the pilots moved quietly. Their routines were not rushed. Each step followed another in a sequence learned through repetition. Hands checked instruments, eyes moved across familiar panels. Small adjustments were made, not because something was wrong, but because it was always done. There is comfort in that kind of preparation, in doing what is known, in focusing on details that can be seen, touched, confirmed, because beyond those details, there is uncertainty. But in this moment, uncertainty remains distant. The sky above the deck looks open, clear, endless, in the same way the ocean below feels endless. There is no visible sign of what lies ahead, no mark in the clouds, no signal in the air, only space, waiting to be crossed. Pilots sit for a moment, sometimes alone, sometimes among others, moving through the same quiet motions. Their thoughts do not need to be spoken. There is an understanding in shared routine, a sense that each person is preparing in their own way, guided by the same rhythm. The wind moves gently across the deck. It carries the familiar scent of fuel and salt, blending into something that belongs only to this place. Half machine, half ocean. Voices are low. Instructions are given without urgency. Everything is measured, deliberate, because preparation is not about speed. It is about readiness, and readiness takes time. Some pilots look outward, beyond the edge of the ship. The horizon is still there, unchanged, distant, offering nothing new. It does not reveal what lies beyond it. It does not hint at what the sky will hold once the aircraft leave the deck. It simply remains a line between what is known and what is not. There is something quiet in that space, a kind of acceptance, because flight out here is not just movement through the air. It is movement into the unknown. Once the aircraft leaves the deck, the world changes. The ship becomes small. The ocean becomes vast. Direction is no longer something you feel beneath your feet, but something you must trust, guided by instruments, by training, by information that may or may not be complete. But none of that has begun yet. For now, everything remains grounded. Engines are still. Wings are still. The deck holds steady beneath the slow motion of the sea. And in that stillness, preparation continues, quietly, carefully, without the need to imagine what comes next. Because imagination, in moments like this, is not useful. Only presence, only the act of being here, now, moving through each step as it comes. A checklist followed, a glance exchanged, a final adjustment made without thought. These small actions carry their own calm. They anchor the moment. They keep everything contained within what is known. And outside of that, the sky waits, not inviting, not resisting, just open, as it has always been. The same sky that stretches over Midway, the same sky that stretches over the ships moving elsewhere across the Pacific. A single, continuous space holding everything beneath it without distinction. And soon, these aircraft will rise into that space. They will leave the quiet rhythm of the deck behind and enter something wider, less certain, more exposed. But not yet. For now, there is only preparation, only the gentle repetition of movements that bring order to a moment that cannot yet be fully understood. And as the ships continue their slow journey across the ocean, as distance continues to close, unseen and unfelt, these pilots remain within this quiet pause, standing beside their aircraft, looking out across a horizon that offers no answers, and preparing for a sky that has not yet changed. Morning approaches. June 4, 1942. Morning does not arrive suddenly, especially on the open ocean. It begins long before the sun appears. A faint light gathers at the edge of the world. The darkness softens, not disappearing all at once, but slowly giving way to something gentler. The stars fade, one by one, until only a few remain, distant, quiet, and then gone. On the Pacific, June 4th, 1942, begins like any other morning. The ocean does not change. It moves with the same steady rhythm, its surface shifting in soft patterns that reflect the early light. The wind passes across it in long, quiet currents. Nothing in the water suggests that this day is different from the one before, and yet time has carried everything to this point. Across miles of open sea, ships have been moving across unseen space. Messages have been traveling across days that felt slow and unbroken. Distance has quietly closed. Now, all of it rests within this moment. The first light spreads across the decks of the ships. Metal surfaces catch a pale glow. Shadows stretch, then soften. The air feels cool, touched by the last traces of night. Movement begins again. Footsteps, quiet voices, small actions that signal the continuation of routine. But something beneath that routine has shifted, not in a way that can be seen, not in a way that can be named, just a subtle awareness that this morning is not entirely the same. On board the carriers, the flight decks begin to stir. Aircraft remain in place, but they no longer feel at rest. There is a sense, quiet, unspoken, that they will not remain still for long. Crew members move with the same practiced rhythm as before, but their attention feels more focused now, more present within each action. No one needs to say it. The day has arrived. Far away, the small island of Midway Atoll rests beneath the same early light. The lagoon reflects the sky in soft tones of blue and gold. The wind moves gently across the narrow strips of land. Structures stand where they have always stood, unchanged, grounded. From the surface, it is still a quiet place, still small, still surrounded by the vast, open ocean. And yet, it is no longer just a point in the distance. Not anymore, because somewhere beyond the horizon, ships have drawn near, not close enough to be seen, but close enough that the separation that once felt endless has begun to fade. The Pacific holds them all within the same space now, no longer distant in the way they once were, no longer moving in isolation. The paths have aligned, and this morning is where they meet. But the ocean does not announce this. It does not rise or shift to mark the moment. It remains calm, steady, indifferent. Clouds drift slowly across the sky, thin and scattered. Light continues to grow, filling the space above and below with a quiet clarity. The horizon sharpens, revealing nothing and everything at once, because what lies beyond it is no longer far away. On board the ships, the routines continue. Checks are completed, signals are received, movements are made in sequence, just as they have been every day before this one. There is no sudden rush, no break in rhythm, only a quiet tightening of focus, a sense that each action matters now in a way that it did not before. And still, there is calm, because this is the moment just before change, the moment where everything still holds together in the same familiar way. The ocean is still the ocean. The sky is still the sky. The ships are still moving, as they always have. But beneath that stillness, something has already begun. Not visibly, not yet, but inevitably, like a tide that has reached its turning point, even if the water has not yet shifted. June 4, 1942, a morning like any other. Light spreading across the Pacific, wind moving gently across the sea, ships continuing their quiet paths, and somewhere within that calm, the beginning of something that will not remain unseen for long. But for now, there is still only this moment, still only the soft arrival of morning, still only the ocean breathing slowly beneath an open sky. Aircraft rising into the sky, one by one. There is a moment just before movement begins, when everything feels perfectly still. The morning has already arrived. Light rests softly across the ocean. The sky, pale and open, stretches without interruption. The ships that have crossed so much distance now move within a space that feels smaller, though nothing in the horizon suggests it. And on the decks, the stillness begins to change, not suddenly, not all at once, but gradually, as one small action leads into another. Engines begin to awaken. At first, only a low vibration, barely noticeable, like a distant hum beneath the surface of the moment. Then, slowly, that sound deepens, not loud, not overwhelming, just present. A steady energy building within the stillness. Crew members move into position. Their motions are familiar, practiced, shaped by repetition. There is no urgency in the way they move, only focus. Each gesture follows another, each signal understood without the need for words. The aircraft, which have rested quietly until now, begin to feel different. Not yet in motion, but no longer still. There is a quiet tension in them, like something preparing to unfold. The first aircraft is guided forward, slowly, carefully. Its movement across the deck is smooth, almost gentle, as if it is being carried by the same rhythm that has guided everything else out here on the ocean. It reaches the edge, pauses. For just a moment, the sky ahead remains unchanged, endless, silent. Then, without suddenness, it begins to move forward. The engine carries it across that final distance, and then, almost effortlessly, it leaves the surface behind, not with force, but with a kind of release. The aircraft rises into the morning air, becoming smaller as it moves away, its shape softening against the brightness of the sky. And then it is gone, not vanished, but absorbed into the vastness above. Another follows, then another, each one repeating the same quiet sequence. Movement, pause, departure. There is no rush to it, no sense of chaos, only a steady flow, one after another, lifting gently into the open space. From a distance, it would look almost peaceful, small shapes rising into a wide sky, their paths stretching outward in different directions, each one following a line that cannot be seen, guided by instructions that exist beyond the horizon. Below them, the ocean remains unchanged. Waves move in soft patterns. Light reflects in shifting tones. The ships continue their slow passage, as if nothing extraordinary is happening at all. But something has begun, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. The sky, which had been empty, now holds movement, quiet movement, measured, deliberate. Each aircraft carries with it a purpose, but that purpose is not visible from here. It exists within plans, within signals, within understandings formed far from this moment. And yet, in the act of rising, something becomes real. Something that had only existed in preparation now enters the world. Pilots guide their aircraft into the open air. The ship behind them grows smaller. The ocean below stretches wider. And ahead, there is only sky, only direction, only the continuation of movement that began long before this morning arrived. From the decks, those who remain watch briefly, not for long, because there are always more tasks to follow, more actions to complete. The rhythm does not stop. It continues just as it always has. Even as the sky above begins to fill with quiet motion, there is no single moment where everything changes. No clear line between stillness and action. Only a gradual shift, a transition so smooth it almost goes unnoticed, until the sky is no longer empty, until the ocean, though still calm, is no longer untouched, and the morning, which began like any other, now carries something more, not visible in the horizon, not reflected in the water, but present in the space above. Aircraft rising, one by one, into a sky that is no longer waiting, but receiving. Missed paths and the quiet vastness between. Once in the air, everything becomes wider. The ship that felt solid beneath your feet fades into the distance. The ocean, already vast from the deck, expands even further, stretching in every direction without interruption. The horizon curves gently, reminding you that the world below is larger than it ever seemed before. And in that space, direction becomes something you must trust. Pilots follow headings set before they left the deck. Angles, bearings, timings, all carefully calculated. All based on information gathered long before the engines ever began to turn. Each aircraft moves along an invisible path, guided not by what can be seen, but by what is believed to be there. But the Pacific does not make this easy. There are no roads in the sky, no markers that confirm where you are. Only light, only cloud, only water below, repeating itself in endless patterns that offer no clear reference point. And so, even with preparation, paths can drift, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, subtly, enough that one direction begins to separate from another. Some aircraft continue forward exactly as planned, their engines steady, their course true, their movement aligned with the quiet intentions that set them in motion. Others begin to feel something different, a small uncertainty, a question that does not have an immediate answer. Is this the correct heading? Is the distance what it should be? Has the timing shifted even slightly? These are not loud thoughts, not distractions, just quiet considerations that arise when the world around you offers nothing to confirm or deny them. The sky remains open. The ocean below remains unchanged. And in that sameness, difference can be difficult to detect. Clouds drift across the flight path, soft and unstructured. Shadows move across the water, altering its surface just enough to make one area resemble another. The light shifts as the sun climbs higher, changing the way distance is perceived. Everything looks similar. Everything feels continuous. And in that continuity, separation can occur. Aircraft that began together may no longer remain so. Their paths, once aligned, begin to diverge by small degrees. A slight variation in direction, a difference in speed, a moment of adjustment that over time becomes distance. No one intends this. No one notices it immediately, because in a space this vast, change happens quietly. A group of aircraft may find themselves alone without realizing when the separation began. The others, once close, once visible, are no longer there. The sky, which had held shared movement, now feels larger, emptier, and still. The flight continues, because turning back is not always simple, because the path forward still exists, even if its certainty has softened. And so they continue, engines carrying them across an ocean that offers no guidance, instruments providing direction, but not reassurance. The horizon remaining distant, unchanged, and silent. There is something deeply quiet about this kind of moment. Not tension, not fear, but a kind of isolation that belongs only to open space, where everything is visible and nothing is known. Below, the Pacific continues its steady motion, unaware of the paths crossing above it, unchanged by the decisions being made in the sky. It reflects the light, it carries the wind, it remains what it has always been: vast, continuous, indifferent. And above it, aircraft move through that vastness, some aligned, some separated, all guided by intentions that cannot be seen from the outside. Paths that were meant to meet, now drifting, not lost completely, but no longer certain. And still, the morning continues. The sky grows brighter, the ocean remains calm, and within that calm, small differences begin to matter, quietly, gradually, like lines drawn across an invisible surface that no one can fully see. A moment of coincidence, quietly aligning. There are moments in the flow of events that do not feel planned, not because there is no plan, but because something small, something almost unnoticed, shifts the outcome in a way no one fully intended. Out over the Pacific that morning, the sky remained wide. Aircraft had spread across it in different directions, following paths that were meant to align but did not always do so. Some continued forward as expected, others moved through space that felt uncertain, guided by instinct as much as by instruction. And then, slowly, something began to change. Not everywhere, not all at once, but in a small part of that vast sky, alignment began. It did not start with clarity. It began with observation, a faint trace in the distance, not a shape at first, just something different, a subtle interruption in the endless blue of ocean below, a line that did not move like water, a pattern that did not belong to waves or light. Pilots, high above the surface, looked down. At first, nothing was certain. The Pacific has a way of creating illusions, shifts in color, reflections of cloud, shadows that stretch and distort across the water. It can make something appear where nothing exists, or hide something that is truly there. But this remained steady, consistent, and slowly it began to take form. Shapes, small at first, then clearer. Lines that suggested movement not of the ocean, but across it. Ships far below, distant against the wide expanse. A fleet moved in quiet formation. From above, it did not appear large, just a few shapes, arranged with purpose, leaving almost no mark behind them as they passed through the water. Smoke rose lightly, drifting upward in soft trails that dissolved into the air. There was nothing dramatic about it, nothing loud, just presence, a realization that something once unseen was now within view. And above that moment, other elements quietly aligned. Clouds had gathered in scattered layers across parts of the sky. Some areas remained clear, open, exposed. Others held soft cover, thin veils that obscured visibility from below, while allowing glimpses from above. Aircraft moving through these layers found themselves in positions that had not been precisely planned, but had become possible. Height, angle, timing, each one, on its own, might not have meant much, but together they formed a brief window, a moment where distance, direction, and visibility aligned just enough to reveal what had been hidden. No announcement marked it. No signal declared its importance. It was simply there for those who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Pilots adjusted their course, not dramatically, just enough to bring the shapes below into clearer view. What had been uncertainty began to settle into recognition. A target, once distant and unseen, now present. And yet, even in that recognition, the moment remained quiet. There was no sudden shift in the sky, no visible change in the ocean. The fleet below continued its movement, unaware of how clearly it had come into view from above. The clouds drifted, the light held steady. Everything remained as it had been. And yet, everything had changed, because now the separation between the two forces had dissolved. Not completely, but enough. Enough for one to see the other. Enough for paths that had crossed invisibly to begin intersecting in a way that could no longer be ignored. There is something almost gentle about the way this moment unfolds. Not forced, not dramatic, but inevitable, as if all the quiet movements that came before, the messages sent through the air, the ships crossing unseen distances, the aircraft drifting through uncertain paths, had been slowly guiding everything toward this point. A single alignment, a brief opening, a moment where what was hidden becomes visible. And in that visibility, the nature of the morning begins to change. Still calm, still quiet, but no longer untouched. Because once something is seen, it cannot return to being unseen. And from this quiet recognition, the next movement will begin. Fires on the ocean, seen from far away. From far enough away, even the most intense moments appear quiet. The ocean has a way of softening everything. Distance takes what is near and makes it small. Sound fades before it can travel far. Shapes lose their sharp edges, blending into the horizon until they become little more than silhouettes against the sky. And so, what unfolds on the Pacific that morning does not feel loud, from every place, from above. From a distance, it becomes something else. A change in color, a shift in the air, a dark shape where there had once been only blue. The fleet below, once steady and uninterrupted in its movement, begins to alter, not all at once, not in a way that can be understood immediately, but gradually, in pieces. A thin line of smoke rises. At first, it looks almost like a cloud, soft, drifting, easily mistaken for something natural. But it does not move the same way. It holds its shape longer. It climbs slowly, drawn upward into the open sky. Then another appears, and another, each one separate, yet connected by what lies below. From a distance, the ships remain small, dark forms against the wide surface of the ocean. Their outlines are still visible, but less defined now, softened by the haze of smoke and light. The water around them continues its gentle motion, unchanged in rhythm, reflecting the sky as it always has. Nothing in the ocean itself seems to react. The waves do not rise. The wind does not shift. The vast surface remains calm, even as something within it has changed. Aircraft pass overhead, some at higher altitudes, where the view is broader, more distant. From there, the scene below appears almost still. Small points of movement, faint trails rising into the air, the suggestion of activity rather than its full presence. Others move closer, but even then, the moment is not held in one place. It unfolds in fragments, seen here, then not seen, partially obscured by cloud, or distance, or angle. The sky does not hold the whole picture at once, and so what remains is impression, smoke drifting upward in slow patterns, shadows shifting across the surface of the sea, shapes that were once steady, now altered, but still quiet. There is no single moment where everything stops. No clear ending, only continuation in a different form. The fleet, which had moved in ordered lines, now appears less defined. Some ships continue forward, others seem to pause, or turn, or drift in ways that are difficult to interpret from above. The ocean holds them all the same. It does not separate what has changed from what has not. It carries everything within its wide, open space, and the sky above remains unchanged, blue, open, endless, as if nothing below could ever fully reach it. Time passes, though it is difficult to measure. Minutes feel longer, moments stretch. The early brightness of morning softens as the light continues its slow journey across the sky, and gradually the movement settles, not into stillness, but into something quieter. The smoke remains for a while, lingering, rising, then thinning as it meets the higher air, where it begins to fade, becoming less defined, less visible, until it blends into the sky itself. From far away, it is possible to see only that something happened, not what, not how, just that the surface of the ocean is no longer entirely unchanged, that a moment passed through it, leaving behind traces that will not remain forever. And then, even those traces begin to disappear, because the Pacific does not hold on to things for long. It absorbs, it smooths, it returns to what it was. The waves continue, the light reflects, the horizon remains. ends, and from a distance, the ocean once again appears as it always has, vast, calm, and without memory. But for those who were there in the sky above or on the ships below, this moment will not feel distant. It will not feel small. Even as the ocean carries it away, even as the smoke fades into the air, something has shifted quietly, irreversibly, and the morning that began in stillness now moves forward into something that can no longer be undone. When the ocean grows quiet again, after movement, there is always a return, not to what was before, but to something that feels similar on the surface. The Pacific, by afternoon, begins to settle again. The sky remains open, its color shifting slowly as the sun continues its path. The light softens, losing the sharp clarity of morning, becoming warmer, more diffuse. Shadows stretch longer across the surface of the water, then begin to fade, and the ocean continues. It does not pause. It does not hold still to remember. It simply moves, as it always has. The waves roll gently across its surface, unchanged in rhythm. The wind passes over it in quiet currents. From a distance, there is no sign that anything has happened here at all. Only water, only sky, only the same endless horizon. And yet, beneath that calm, there is difference. Not visible, not immediate, but present, because what has passed through this space does not leave marks the way land does. There are no scars across the ocean, no lines drawn to show where one moment ended and another began. Instead, there is absence, spaces where something once was, now no longer remains. From afar, it is impossible to see, but for those who move within this space, it can be felt. A subtle shift, a quiet awareness that the patterns have changed. Ships that once moved in steady formation are no longer all there. Aircraft that rose into the morning sky have not all returned, and the ocean, vast and open as it is, holds these absences without comment. It does not fill them. It does not acknowledge them. It simply continues. There is something deeply quiet about that continuation, not indifferent in a harsh way, but steady in a way that does not depend on what has happened. The Pacific does not slow for memory. It does not pause for reflection. It moves forward, always. By late afternoon, the light begins to take on a different quality. The brightness softens into warmth. The surface of the water reflects tones of gold and pale orange, shifting gently with each small wave. The horizon, still distant, begins to blur slightly, as if the day itself is beginning to let go of its sharp edges. The sky feels larger now, more open, more distant, and within that openness, there is space again, not empty, but quiet. Aircraft that remain in the air move less frequently now. The sky, which had held motion earlier, begins to clear. What once crossed it with purpose has passed through, leaving behind only the wide, uninterrupted expanse that was always there. On the surface of the ocean, movement slows, not in speed, but in intensity. The patterns of the day begin to fade into something more familiar, more constant, more like the ocean itself. And as evening approaches, the world begins to soften further. The wind cools slightly. The light lowers. The colors deepen. then begin their slow transition into dusk. From a distance, it becomes difficult to tell that anything at all has taken place. The Pacific looks as it always does, vast, endless, unchanged. But within that stillness, something has shifted, not in the waves, not in the sky, but in the balance of what remains and what does not. And though the ocean will not remember in a way that can be seen, those who were part of this moment will carry it forward in thought, in memory, in the quiet understanding that this day, though it now fades into evening, has altered something beyond the horizon. Still, the ocean returns to calm because that is what it does. It absorbs, it smooths, it continues. And as the light begins to fade, as the sky prepares to release the day into night, the Pacific breathes slowly, once more, as if nothing has happened, as if everything is exactly the same. But beneath that calm, the world has already begun to change. Ships that do not return, and the space they leave behind. As evening settles, the ocean feels wider, not because it has changed, but because something within it is no longer there. Earlier in the day, there had been movement, ships crossing paths, aircraft tracing lines across the sky, signals moving invisibly through the air. All of it part of a pattern that, for a time, filled the vastness with direction. Now, that pattern has shifted. From a distance, the Pacific appears the same. The surface moves in soft, repeating waves. The horizon stretches without interruption. The sky, fading slowly toward dusk, reflects gently across the water, blending color and light into something calm and continuous. But within that calm, there are spaces, not empty in a visible way, not marked, but present. Spaces where something once moved and now does not. Ships do not disappear in a single moment, not in the way something vanishes from sight. Instead, their absence becomes known slowly through what does not return, a formation that feels incomplete, a rhythm that no longer aligns, a silence where there had once been motion. From far away, it cannot be seen. The ocean does not reveal absence clearly. It does not show what is missing. It only shows what remains. And so, the vast surface continues to look whole, even when it is not. There is something quiet about that kind of loss. Not loud, not immediate, but gradual. A realization that unfolds over time as the day gives way to evening, and the movements that once filled the sky and sea begin to settle. On board the ships that remain, the rhythm continues. Tasks are completed, watches are kept, voices remain low, measured, carried by the same steady pattern that has guided everything throughout the day. And yet, there is awareness, not spoken, not defined, but present. Because the ocean, though it hides what is gone, does not prevent those who move upon it from sensing the change. There are fewer signals now, fewer movements to follow. The space between things feels larger, even though the ocean itself has not grown. The sky above reflects this quiet. Aircraft that once crossed it have returned or have not. Their absence is not marked by sound or sight, but by the stillness that replaces their motion. The air feels more open now, less filled, as if the day itself is beginning to release what it held. Clouds drift slowly, unchanged. The light continues its gradual descent. Everything moves forward without pause. There is no moment where the ocean stops to acknowledge what has passed. No boundary between before and after. Only transition. Only the quiet continuation of time. As darkness begins to gather at the edges of the sky, the horizon softens again. The clear line between sea and sky begins to blur, merging into a single, endless shade. The details that could once be seen fade into suggestion, then into memory. And within that fading, the sense of absence remains, not as something heavy, not as something that disrupts the calm, but as something subtle, woven into the stillness. The Pacific carries it the same way it carries everything else, without resistance, without recognition, simply allowing it to exist within the vastness of the moment. And so, the ships that do not return do not leave visible traces behind. No path across the water, no mark upon the horizon, only a quiet change in the pattern of what remains. And as night approaches, as the last light fades from the surface of the sea, the ocean continues, vast, unbroken, holding within it both what is present and what is no longer there, together in the same endless space. A turning point, quietly understood. Some moments do not announce themselves as important. They pass quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Only later, when distance has formed between the present and the past, does their meaning begin to settle into place. The day that has unfolded across the Pacific, the movements, the crossings, the moments that rose and then faded, does not feel like a turning point in the moment itself. It feels like a continuation, like another day carried forward by time. And yet, something within it has shifted, not visibly, not in a way that the ocean reveals, but in the balance of things, because beyond what can be seen from the decks of ships, beyond the quiet surface of the water, this day has altered the direction of movement across a much larger space. Paths that once felt certain are no longer the same. Plans that moved forward with quiet confidence have been changed. Not completely, but enough. Enough that the shape of what comes next will be different. And still, the ocean remains unchanged. The Pacific does not reflect this shift. It does not rise or fall in response. It continues its slow, steady motion, holding within it the same endless expanse that existed before this day began. But for those who understand what has taken place, there is a quiet recognition, not loud, not expressed in dramatic words, just a sense, a realization that settles gradually, like light fading into evening. This mattered not only in the moment, but beyond it, because some events do not end when they are over. They continue. They extend forward, shaping what follows in ways that cannot yet be fully seen. And this day is one of those moments. It has changed the balance across the Pacific, not in a way that is immediately visible to every ship or every person, but in a deeper way, a way that shifts direction, a way that alters what is possible. There is something quiet about that kind of change. It does not demand attention. It does not require recognition. It simply becomes part of what is. and over time, its presence grows clearer as new movements begin, as new decisions are made, as the path forward unfolds in a way that would not have been the same before this moment passed. On the ocean, evening continues. The light softens further. The sky deepens into richer tones. The horizon, still distant, becomes less defined, as if the world itself is beginning to rest. Ships move more slowly now, not in speed, but in feeling. The urgency that may have existed earlier has faded into something quieter, something more reflective. The rhythm of the day returns to a familiar calm, and within that calm, understanding begins to take shape, not complete, not final, but present, because those who were part of this moment, whether they saw it clearly or only in fragments, carry something forward with them, a sense that the ocean they move across is not quite the same as it was before, even if it looks the same, even if it feels the same, because meaning does not always appear in the surface of things. It exists beneath, in the direction of movement, in the quiet shift of possibility, in the way one moment leads into another, and this moment has already begun to lead beyond itself into what comes next. Still, the Pacific continues. It does not pause to reflect. It does not mark the significance of what has passed. It simply holds it within its vast and endless space. And as night approaches, as the last light fades gently from the horizon, this turning point settles into place, quietly, naturally, as part of the flow of time, under a sky that offers no sign of how much has just changed. The Pacific remains vast and unchanged. Night returns the same way it always does, slowly, gently, without asking anything of the day that came before. The last traces of light fade from the horizon, and the Pacific begins to lose its color. Blues soften into gray, then into something deeper. The line between sea and sky dissolves once more, until it becomes difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. Above, the stars appear, one by one, then many, then countless. They spread across the sky in quiet patterns, steady and distant, untouched by what has passed below. Their light reflects faintly on the surface of the ocean, scattered and broken by the slow movement of waves, and beneath them, the Pacific continues. It does not hold the day in place. It does not preserve its moments. It moves forward, as it always has, endlessly. There is something comforting in that, a sense that no matter what crosses this vast expanse, no matter what rises and fades within it, the ocean itself remains, not unchanged in every detail, but unchanged in its nature. It breathes, it moves, it holds everything, without becoming any one thing. The events of the day, the ships that crossed paths, the aircraft that rose into the sky, the moments that shifted the direction of what would come next, all of it now rests behind the present moment, not gone, but no longer unfolding, only remembered, only carried forward in quiet ways. On the surface, there is no sign. The waves continue their gentle rhythm. The wind moves softly across the water. The sky stretches wide above, filled with distant light. From afar, it would be impossible to know that anything had happened here at all, that this place This same expanse of ocean had held a moment that would echo far beyond itself, because the Pacific does not mark its history on its surface. It does not leave traces that remain. It allows everything to pass through and then returns to stillness. There is a kind of peace in that return, not because nothing matters, but because everything is held within something larger, something that does not need to change in order to contain what has changed. Ships that remain continue their slow movement through the night, their lights small and distant against the vast darkness, their paths steady, guided by instruments and quiet understanding. They move forward, not toward what has already happened, but toward what comes next, and the sky above them remains open, unbroken, endless. The same sky that stretched over the morning now deepened into night, the same space that held movement, now holding stillness again. Time continues, not in a way that can be seen, but in the gentle unfolding of one moment into another. The day has ended, the ocean remains, and somewhere within that endless expanse, the memory of what has passed settles quietly into the flow of everything that will follow, not as something separate, not as something isolated, but as part of a larger rhythm that does not stop, that does not pause, that carries everything forward, slowly, silently, endlessly. And so, the Pacific breathes beneath the night sky, vast and calm, as if it has always been this way and always will be.